Hey, this is Yazuki Wolf, and today we're going to be looking at the combat in Skyrim VR, particularly how archery and melee combat translate into the virtual reality space. Is it translated well enough to throw away your keyboard and your game controller, or does it still need some work? Well, let's find out. So, first off, we have bow and arrow. Now, archery in VR works basically exactly how you would expect it to. It is a very good translation of what you would expect a virtual archery experience to be. You have your arrow in one hand and your bow in the other. You knock the arrow, you pull back, you aim, and you shoot. And I love it. It is awesome because no longer are you just using your mouse or your game controller to line up a reticle with your target and then pressing a button to shoot. Now you have all these extra interesting things going on where you actually have the vector between the 2 points of your hands, the one hand that's holding the bow and the other hand that's pulling back the arrow, that you actually have to think about not only where your reticule is, because there is no reticule anymore. It's also about, so you line up the arrow, but so like right now, if I shoot, I'm going to peak somewhere near the target. But even if I lined up the arrow right, if my hand was over here or like over here or something, it's gonna go way off into that distance. It's gonna. I don't actually want to waste an arrow, but you get my point. That you actually have to think about the vectors involved. There is a setting, and I believe this is actually the default setting when you start Skyrim, that will keep the angle of your arrow in relation to your bow at a perfect 90-degree angle, and it keeps it locked at that angle. That feels really weird to me because it no longer... So I can switch that setting real quick. So you see here with the default setting, the bow or the arrow is always at 90-degree angle with the bow. So that no matter if I put my hand up or down, it always stays at 90 degrees. This doesn't feel right to me because if I want to shoot higher or lower, I don't want that to only be based on where I'm holding the bow. I like to be able to actually manipulate the two vectors more. So if you want a better experience with your bow, with your archery, I highly recommend that you go to the settings, VR settings, and find, where is it? Realistic bow aiming, and put that on. Once you have realistic bow aiming, you can the vector will actually change, so it won't be locked anymore. So now I can kind of hold it here. I could go down here and I could shoot up or down. It just feels a lot. I will watch it. It feels a lot better in terms of a 1-to-1 ratio of what you're doing in the non-VR space and the VR space. So you can see pretty much you can shoot where you want. Now there are some things that this does to affect gameplay. In your standard VR, in your standard Skyrim game, non-VR version, the time it takes to shoot an arrow is based on an animation of your character, that you press the shoot button and your character, or you press the, what would you call it? The draw button, I guess, and your character begins to draw the bow. And then once it's fully drawn, then you release the button and it shoots. So this means that you're kind of limited in terms of how quickly you can shoot arrows. In VR, however, you can pretty much pump out the arrows as fast as you can pull back and pretty much do like a machine gun shot of arrows like this. And this makes it feel somewhat OP, and it also makes some of the perks in the game where it increases your attack speed probably superfluous, in my opinion. But in terms of doing a VR gameplay as an archer, it is great. And I think that is a really good thing because archery, so far, in my opinion, is the more immersive, more enjoyable experience in VR. We're going to go ahead and show you some archery combat in a moment. But before we do that, I'm just going to show you real quickly how this compares to the standard melee. So if we take out, let's say, a dwarven shield with my Skyforged steel sword. There we go. Okay, so now we're in a standard melee build. Melee doesn't translate quite as well into VR. The reason for that is that if you took a game that's made specifically for VR, like Vanishing Realms or other games, a lot of them will actually have colliders on your shield and on your weapons, so that you can it actually matters where you strike your opponent. So like if I were to strike here, it would hit the collider of his shield. If I were to strike here, it would hit him in the stomach. If I were to go like this, it would actually collide with his sword and cause issues. And alternatively, when you're on defense, if his sword was coming at me, I would be able to put my sword here and make the colliders hit each other so that he doesn't reach me, or just have my shield out like this and it would block. I could do stuff like this and be able to block on this side while I'm attacking here. Those are really interesting melee combat immersive scenarios that come up in a game that is made specifically for VR. Unfortunately, my impression of Skyrim VR is that there aren't actually colliders on these objects, in terms of that you can actually just place it in virtual space and have it affect the things around it. It seems like it's more translating the actual animations of the original non-VR Skyrim into the virtual space. That's hard to describe. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that whereas in the non-VR game, you would be pressing a button on your controller or on your mouse to input the attack animation or the block animation, in VR, the button or mouse press has been replaced with a gesture. So if you have movement in your attack hand, then that will register as an attack. Right. And it doesn't matter whether you do it slowly or quickly, because in order to do a power attack, it's not about the speed at which you do the gesture. It's about if you do the gesture with a trigger press, then that turns into a power attack. So that's a little bit unimmersive for me. Like you probably saw right there, there was no real difference in the power attack versus the regular attack. The only difference is that the power attack took away some of my stamina. So you can see that is not the most immersive way to handle attack versus power attack. Secondly, when you're blocking, if I were to do stuff like this, where I try to just block my side while I'm attacking here, like maybe there's arrows coming on that side, right now I am not blocking. In order to block, see if I don't know, you probably won't be able to hear this in the video, but there's like a little cha-ching sound when I get into this position. It goes cha-ching, and now you can see that I cannot see through the shield. If I move it down here, now it's somewhat transparent. Here it's transparent as well. I move here, no longer transparent. So what that means is that when I am doing this specific gesture, it translates to mean that my character is blocking, and so incoming attacks will be blocked. It doesn't matter if they're coming from. It doesn't matter if there's arrows coming from that side and I have my shield to my back like this, it's not going to block the arrows. I'd have to turn around and get into this gesture in order to block. So that is a little bit less than immersive. Now, that being said, it does work, and if you're used to playing non-virtual reality Skyrim, it translates pretty well to your old experience. I will probably do another video going more into the melee combat, but for this video, right now, I want to focus mostly on archery. I just wanted to briefly explain how that worked. And now, the one other thing that I have to explain before I go into a combat scenario is movement. So you have two options for movement in Skyrim VR. You can do a teleport movement in which you move your left hand, you take your left hand and you point to where you want to go, and then you release a button to teleport rather, to that position. And this is what I've done with most VR games, and I recommend it for most people who are prone to motion sickness, because it does prevent you from feeling queasy as the world is moving around you. But I am actually a person who is prone to motion sickness, and I have had to use teleports in every game I've played up until I played Skyrim VR and also Fallout VR. I believe that Bethesda has changed the animation such that, well, I don't know if you can see in the video, but when I move, there should be, especially if I dash, there's going to be a black silhouette around the screen. And that allows me to move with direct movement without feeling queasy or seasick or motion sick. Also, don't be confused if you look at the video and you're paying too much attention to the VR section, you start feeling motion sick. Well, first off, look away from it for a little while so you can kind of regain yourself, and then look back. And then the other thing you need to know is that if you feel queasy watching videos of virtual reality, that does not mean that you will feel queasy playing virtual reality. The difference being that when you are watching a video, you are not the one moving. You are not the one that is moving your head. So you're seeing movements that are not your own, and that makes your head confused, thus you feel motion sick. In VR, your head is moving at the exact same pace as the images are. So it feels like you're just looking around yourself in a 360-degree world. I usually would suggest that you use the teleport if you feel motion sickness, but I found that I have been able to use Skyrim without using teleportation, and that has opened up a whole new virtual reality experience for me. Because, well, let me explain really quickly how the movement works. You have this kind of a touchpad on the Vive stick. Anyways, when you press up on here, it will move in the direction that your controller is facing. If you move left, it will move left to the position that your controller is facing. Right will move right, and then back will move back. So essentially, if I'm pointing straight forward, up is forward, back is back, left is right, left is left, and right is right. Now that works really great and it's intuitive. But as a Gopher, if any of you have watched his video explaining when he tried VR, it may get a little bit more complicated when you are combining it with something like a blocking motion with your shield. Because as you may have noticed, it's relative to your controller, which means if I just press forward, I could just press forward and then point to where I want to go, and all I have to do is press forward. I could press forward and still be moving right. I could press forward and move left. I could press forward and move forward and move back. So it's relative to the controller position. So what that means is when you put your shield up, now your controller is pointing straight up. So when you press up, which is now straight up to you, you're moving forward, and down, which is now straight down to you, you're moving back. And what would be forward for your direction is now moving kind of to the left-ish, and right is like that. So it's because it's relative to the position of your controller, it may be disorientating when you are trying to use your hand for other things besides movement. When you're just using your hand 100% for movement, it's very simple. But once you start combining other actions, it may be disorientating, and that's something that Gopher pointed out in his video. I, in my experience, have found that once you play the game for 2-3 hours, it becomes very intuitive. And I have not had too many troubles with it. And it has really opened up a new world for me because for example, when you're playing Dark Souls and you have someone that you're fighting against and you're trying to like move around to their back and like backstab them while they're attacking you, this has opened it up for me in VR where I can now move around this guy like I'm playing Dark Souls or something, you know? Do you see how I can kind of like circle him like this? Without the direct movement, it would be very difficult to do that. I would have to be like pointing to a place on the ground and then teleporting, and then pointing to the next place on the ground, then teleporting, or like teleporting sideways while I'm doing this. And that has never really been a very good one-to-one ratio for me. It was interesting as its own kind of virtual reality experience, but now that I have direct movement, it has just opened things up entirely. You know, like this type of movement, it just feels really, really great to be able to do this in VR. And then also when you're in actual combat and you could see them attacking you and you could judge the distance between you and them, and you could kind of like be like, oh, they're attacking, I'm going to step back and let them attack, and then I'm going to strike forward and attack. You know, it just feels really good and immersive. I will go more into the ins and outs of what the combat is like for melee combat later. But just one last thing to show you before I move into the actual combat with a bow is in weapons. If you do feel that, like Gopher, it's too hard for you to do the movement as well as doing blocking or holding a bow or doing other actions, a possible solution may be to use two-handed weapons. Two-handed weapons in VR actually is controlled by just one hand. It's controlled by your right hand. So right now I have a great dwarven sword, but I'm holding it with just one hand. And I mean, you could pretend like you're holding it with two and kind of go like this, and that would that'd be very immersive, I believe. But if you want to kind of just focus on movement with your left hand, you can have your left hand now do nothing except for movement. So I can keep it right here, and this is 100%. My left hand is doing all the movement. And now my right hand is going to use the two-handed sword to attack as I please. And now this is one other thing that seems pretty interesting about that I just noticed while I was moving, is that you are able to attack to your sides. It appears. So like I could be facing this way and still swing to my right side, or to my left side, and those attacks are registering. So that's something you wouldn't be able to do in a non-VR version of Skyrim. I'll try that out a little bit more maybe when I'm doing a VR combat scenario. But right now, let's look at archery again. An archery scenario. I'm going to load one of my favorite parts of the game where archery really comes in handy. Is this it? All right, so this is Dustman's Crypt. This is an area where a bunch of Draugr are going to come out and attack me. I'm going to show you how awesome it is to use archery in VR. Okay, here we are in the crypt. I have my bow and arrow, and I have my companion Farkas over there, kind of holding the front line for me while I kind of stand back and let loose my arrows to support him. So you can see that right away, if you have a follower, it helps you a lot as an archer, because you could have them be in the front line while you support, which makes it a lot more manageable. And later on, you'll see that there'll be more Draugr coming out from all over, and it will get a lot hairier, and I won't always be able to rely on Farkas to support to tank for me. But that's all right, because even if you only use your bow and arrow, you still have some moves that you can rely on. So like if I'm close to him, I can actually bash him with my bow. I don't know if you noticed that, but see, you get a little bash here, which helps a lot if they're about to slash you with an axe or whatnot. Now, first off, you can use your movement here, the direct movement, to move back and kind of judge the distance that you want to keep between you and the enemy. Don't kill Farkas. So I have it on legendary right now, so they're pretty beefy, but I can't take any hits because I think I take like 4 to 5 times damage, and it will really hurt me if I take any hits. But see here, what I do a lot when I'm fighting, I don't actually have the shouts enabled at this point in the game, but later on when I play my other games, I often will use a combination of bashing and shouting to keep the enemies at bay. I may show you that in a second. I may show you that later if I have time, but for now, let's actually switch to some melee for the rest of this. So now we're going to take the Falmer Axe with Iron Shield. Okay. And another thing you'll notice in VR is that range of weapons really seems to matter a lot more than it does in the well, that was awesome, Farkas. You gotta do that more often. It seems to matter a lot more than it does in the non-VR version, because I can really feel right now with this small axe that I have to really lean in to hit the enemies. And so I could go in here, I could do a it's a little bit difficult to do the bash. I'll explain in a second. So the thing with bashing with the shield is that when you hold up in your blocking position, you move very, very slow. You see how slowly I'm moving? So you'll find yourself trying to get close to an enemy, but you'll hold up your shield too early and it will slow you down. So you have to kind of like keep it at your side, move forward to the enemy, then lift up the shield and attack. That's gonna take some getting used to, I believe. Also just the leaning in again. I believe that later on there's a perk to allow you to move faster with the shield blocking. So if you had that perk, it'd probably be easier to kind of like charge forward with your shield. But right now you can't charge forward. You just kind of inch forward a little bit, and it makes it a little hard to bash. This character is an archer, so his perks are all for archery, and his level is high in archery. So if you have you could make your character different if you like. But another thing to show up is the steel greatsword. So talking about range, having a greatsword works really well in VR, because now you see how I can kind of judge the range of his swings, and it's a lot easier for me to get in and attack him as well. And you can block with this sword as well. You just kind of hold it like this, and once it's flashing like that, it means you're in your blocking mode. Once again, that's a little awkward because you can't just parry like you would with a real weapon. You have to keep in mind that the game is registering an attack mode and a defense mode, so you have to kind of get in your defense mode, and then you can block. You can also bash, I believe, with the two-handed sword. So if there's an enemy that I could show up. Oh crap! Is Farkas down? Come on, Farkas. I'm relying on you, Farkas. So let's see. Here, if I get into the block and then attack, doesn't seem to be registering. Let's try this one more time. Okay, so block and then bash. Oh, there you go. I got the little bash there. So the two-handed sword could be a very good solution because you can see how I'm able to control my movement. Where's the camera? Right, so you can see how I can control my movement with my right hand. My left hand has that reach, so that I don't have to feel like I have to physically reach out and possibly hit things in my room. And it's very easy to kind of judge the distance with your enemy. So even if you're not blocking, you can just kind of like move out of their attack range and move into their attack range pretty easily. It may be good you may be able to do that with a shield as well, but once again, you may want to get the perk to allow yourself to move faster because as I tried to explain, I don't know how well it showed in the video, but when I have my shield up, you're inching forward, you're not moving quickly, which means that if your enemy's in front of you, you want to get inside and then attack, it's going to be hard to get that movement. If you have a very large play space and you can physically jump forward and attack, then yeah, maybe that would be better. But since I have a limited area for my VR, I can't always do that. Okay, I think that's pretty much all for this episode. So let me know if that was helpful to you. If you have any other questions or suggestions for future videos, go ahead and put that in the comments. And until next time, keep gaming, live boldly, and be creative. よろしく